dear you. There was a quiet moment when you realized something was different. Not loud enough to alarm you, not painful enough to stop you. Just a soft awareness that settled in and stayed. You noticed that even simple things required more effort than before. Getting through the day didn't feel impossible, but it didn't feel light either. You weren't overwhelmed in a dramatic sense. You weren't falling apart. You were simply tired in a way that didn't ask for attention, but didn't leave you alone either. You still did what needed to be done. You still showed up. You still responded when people needed you. And because you could do all of that, you told yourself you were fine. But inside, you felt a quiet depletion. Like your emotional energy was being spent faster than it could be restored. You didn't wake up excited, but you didn't wake up hopeless. You moved through your days on familiarity rather than intention, on habit rather than desire. You felt it in conversations. You listened, but didn't always feel engaged. You responded, but without the same emotional presence you once had. You cared, but it felt like caring had become heavier than before. And sometimes, you wondered when that shift happened. When feeling deeply started to feel like work instead of connection. You didn't complain because nothing was technically wrong. You didn't want to sound ungrateful. You didn't want to exaggerate something you couldn't clearly explain. So you stayed quiet and assumed this was just what life felt like after a while. But there were moments, small, unguarded moments, when the tiredness surfaced, when you felt irritated without reason, when you wanted to withdraw but didn't know why, when you felt distant from emotions that used to come easily to you. And those moments confused you more than anything else. You asked yourself silent questions. Why do I feel drained even when nothing big is happening? Why does rest not feel as restorative as it used to? Why do I feel like I'm running on low without knowing what's draining me? You didn't have answers. And without answers, you defaulted to endurance. You pushed through. You managed. You adapted. Because that's what you've always done. If you're reading this and feeling a quiet sense of recognition, it's because emotional fatigue rarely announces itself clearly. It blends into routine. It hides behind competence. It lives in people who are capable, caring, and used to being strong. You weren't failing. You weren't weak. You were tired in a way many people are, but few know how to name. Emotional fatigue doesn't come from one event. It comes from accumulation, from carrying responsibilities without pause, from being available without replenishment, from absorbing emotions, your own and others, without giving yourself space to release them. Your past self understands now why this tiredness settled in so quietly. You had been strong for a long time, not in obvious ways, but in consistent ones. You adapted. You coped. You adjusted expectations. You learned how to keep moving even when things felt uncertain or heavy. Strength became your default, and default strength rarely asks for rest. You didn't collapse because you learned how to regulate. You didn't break because you learned how to compartmentalize. You didn't stop because stopping felt inconvenient, maybe even unsafe. So instead, you carried on, assuming you could recover later, but ladder kept moving. You also lived in a rhythm that didn't allow much emotional recovery. Even quiet moments were filled with noise screens, thoughts, plans. Even rest was measured by productivity, and without realizing it, you stopped checking in with how you actually felt. You functioned well enough that no one questioned it, including you. Emotional fatigue often shows up as disconnection, not numbness, exactly. Not sadness, exactly. Just a subtle dulling of emotional range. Joy feels quieter, interest feels muted, reactions feel delayed, and because nothing feels extreme, it's easy to ignore. But over time, that muted state becomes exhausting in itself. You start to miss feeling fully present, fully engaged, fully alive inside your own experiences. Your past self also sees now that part of the fatigue came from emotional responsibility. You were the one who listened, the one who understood, the one who held space. And while you may not have labeled it as such, that kind of emotional availability takes energy. When it isn't balanced with being supported yourself, it drains you slowly. You weren't meant to always be okay. You weren't meant to always be okay. You weren't meant to always be the one who adapts. The fatigue wasn't a failure, it was feedback. A signal that something needed attention, not fixing, not solving, just acknowledgement. You didn't need to change your life overnight. You didn't need to withdraw from everything. You didn't need to become someone else. You needed space to feel without managing, space to rest without guilt, space to exist without expectation. And because that space hadn't been available, your system found another way to cope by slowing emotional response. On Sen, you understand this. The fatigue makes sense. It stops feeling mysterious. It stops feeling personal. It becomes something you can meet with curiosity instead of frustration. Now I'm speaking to the you who is here right now. The you who feels a little worn down. The you who wonders if this tiredness will ever lift. The you who just wants to feel like yourself again, without having to work so hard for it. Take a slow breath, not to change anything, just to arrive. You don't need to push through this feeling. You don't need to label it as a problem. You don't need to justify why you're tired. Emotional fatigue doesn't require permission to exist. It simply asks to be noticed. You are allowed to slow down emotionally. You are allowed to feel less for a while. You are allowed to rest in ways that don't look productive. Recovery from emotional fatigue isn't dramatic. It doesn't come with sudden motivation or instant clarity. It comes quietly, through small moments of gentleness, through choosing not to react immediately, through letting yourself say, I don't have the capacity for this right now. You don't have to withdraw from the world to recover. You don't have to disappear. You just have to stop overextending yourself emotionally. Notice what drains you. Notice what restores you, even slightly. Notice when you're saying yes out of habit instead of desire. These small notices matter. There will be days when the fatigue still lingers. That doesn't mean you're stuck. It means healing isn't linear. Some days will feel lighter. Some will feel heavy again. Both are part of the process. You are not broken for feeling this way. You are not behind. You are not losing yourself. You are recalibrating. If you're listening to this and thinking, "This sounds exactly like me," that's because emotional fatigue is widely shared and rarely named. Many people carry it quietly, assuming they're just tired or unmotivated, when in reality they're simply overdue for care. Care doesn't always look like action. Sometimes it looks like permission. Permission to pause. Permission to feel less. Permission to be where you are without turning it into a judgment. Over time, emotional energy returns, not because you force it, but because you stop spending it unnecessarily. Interest comes back. Presence deepens. The heaviness lifts gradually. You will feel again. You will care again without it costing you everything. You will find your emotional balance again. For now, it's enough to acknowledge where you are, to breathe. To let yourself be human without expectation. You've carried a lot. It's okay to set some of it down. That doesn't mean you're giving up. It means you're finally listening. Sincerely, you.